Well, it's official. Like, officially official. Resident Evil 4 Remake is actually happening. Not that it's all that surprising. There have only been rumors and leaks for like 2 millennias. Though, if you are asking me, there's a part of myself that just kinda wish they didn't. Resident Evil 4 is my favorite game. I know, controversial statement. Everyone and their grandmothers loves this game, but it's true. It was my first horror game. It's the game I've played the most. It's one of the games I actually consider myself good at. It's one of the only games I can play multiple times a year and not get bored. I mean, for fuck's sakes, I bought a VR headset and sold my soul to Mark Zuckerberg just to play this damn thing on VR. Well, actually, I bought it in hopes that I could connect it to my PC and play Boneworks because I heard it's a fantastic game, but apparently the Quest 2 has connection problems. So, in many ways, no matter what Resident Evil 4 Remake does, I'm not gonna like it more than the original game. And honestly, that's fine. I came to grips with that a while ago and told myself that as long as they made a remake that at least did justice to the original, I could walk away happy. In fact, I had planned to write a video on how they can do exactly that. But now that we got a trailer, I instead want to use maybe some of those points to talk about my main fears around the remake and kind of just talk about my thoughts on remakes in general. I want to get a couple things out of the way first. This video is speculative. Speculative? Is that how you pronounce it? Why do I feel like I'm pronouncing it wrong? I can be very much proven wrong on about everything I say here when the gameplay trailer or even demo drops. And then this video just makes me look stupid. So, I'm taking a gamble here, guys. Yeah, that's how I'm spitting this. I want to say that even if I'm proven right on what I say, there's no guarantee that I still won't enjoy the game for whatever it ends up being. I'm not making this video to say the remake will be bad. This is more talking about my ideal remake in the context of the trailer that we got, and why I don't see it happening. Lastly, just think of this as a vent session. Maybe by getting out my negative feelings on this remake out of the way early, I can move past them. Is it gonna work? I have no idea, don't ask me, but it's worth a try, right? And hopefully I can make this entertaining or at least thought-provoking enough to make you want to watch all the way through. So first and foremost, what makes a good remake? This is a tricky question because there is no right or wrong answer. It can be anything from a faithful and mostly same retelling of the original, designed for modern audiences, to a complete reimagining of the original material altogether. And both approaches have their defenders, as well as those in the middle of those spectrums. Where you stand will affect how you feel about this remake, and also how you perceive other people's perspectives. This is something I want people to keep in mind going forward. Anyways, now that we got that all set up, where do I stand? Well, I lean in the direction of wanting a remake that plays like the original without being full-blown against a reimagining of the game. My idea of a good remake is not a game that does the exact same thing again, or has every single thing the original did. However, I do think whatever a remake does do has to be in the spirit of the original, and take the elements that made that game great and translate it to today's standards. The same fundamental things that make the original great need to make the remake good. At the very least good. To give you a better idea of exactly what I mean, I'm going to talk about Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes. Resident Evil 2 Remake is, by most, considered a good remake. There are those who disagree. That's the nature of these things, what can you do? But most people can at least agree, whether or not they think it's better than the original or not, that it at least did the original game justice. Resident Evil 3 Remake, on the other hand, not so much. It has its fans, and on the whole, I personally don't think it's a terrible game as its own thing, but it doesn't have the same general consensus of being good like Resident Evil 2 Remake does. In fact, you'd have many who say it's a bad remake, even a disgrace. Why is that? Fundamentals. See, neither of these games are a one-for-one remake. They both take liberties with level and game design, the order of moments, and dialogue. Yet, one is liked significantly more than the other. Why? Again, fundamentals. That's why Resident Evil 2 Remake is built off the fundamentals of the original game. The new mechanics they did add, like boarding up windows, defense items from Resident Evil 1 Remake, and how Mr. X work, they are all in service of iterating on what made the original Resident Evil 2 loved so much. That sense of exploration, resource managing, puzzle solving, and the sudden decision making is the core of Resident Evil 2 and the remake's gameplay. The same core elements that make the OG good make the remake good, regardless of which one you think is better. Resident Evil 3 Remake, however, chose a different foundation altogether. It's not that there isn't good things about it. It's that the things that make it good have almost nothing to do with the original. Nemesis is barely in it, and when he is, he dies easily to one grenade. It's a mostly linear game. Huge chunks of content are missing. The puzzles are non-existent. Really, the two main things that this game gets praised for is the extra difficulty modes and the introduction of the reward system. Which is all fine if you aren't the biggest fan of Resident Evil 3 or you never played it, so you are detached from the original experience. But you can see why plenty of fans of the original felt like this game did the original a disservice. Because even though it was good on its own, it wasn't reminiscent of what the fans loved about the original. Hence they feel like it didn't do it justice. But hopefully you've noticed that it's not about the specific recreation of moments. Sure, cut content was a big complaint, but not the only one. For many, including myself, it didn't even feel like a normal Resident Evil game. Then on top of that, the main antagonist that makes the game special, Nemesis, this hulking death machine who has one goal in mind and that's killing you, felt hardly present in his game. And very weak. It's not that they integrated him in a different way. It's that they did it in a way that took away from what made him special. One remake iterated on the foundation of the original, while the other sort of shot it out of a cannon, potentially into a concrete wall. We as gamers become attached to these experiences. We want to share them with more people so that they can maybe see for themselves what we love about these games. This is the main reason Dark Souls fans don't like the idea of difficulty modes. They have come to love those experiences for what they offer, and they want people to experience that firsthand. Something they feel would be diminished if they gave players an easy difficulty. Because the core of what those players love about those games is that unforgiving nature of it all. That's derived from the lack of explanation to players, open-ended game design, punishing enemy encounters, and the sense of accomplishment that comes from overcoming all of that. Imagine a remake of the first Dark Souls game that had an easy mode, or actually, even worse, was just easy. Like, it had all the same content in theory and on paper, but it was just baby mode the whole time. Enemies were piss easy, the game would explain every single mechanic to you so there's no guesswork involved or sense of experimentation. There would be a map with objective markers so you never get lost. Dark Souls fans would not be happy with that remake. Not because it's different in its content, art design, level design, and length. We already established this hypothetical remake has all those things in it. It's because it's different at its core, and doesn't represent what they loved about the original in the first place. Now I know there's a bit of a gray area where everyone has different reasons for enjoying something, but hopefully I've laid the groundwork for my overarching argument. My fear for Resident Evil 4 Remake isn't that it will be different in and of itself, but from where and how it's different. And more importantly, if it will abandon the things that made Resident Evil 4 such an amazing game in the first place. Which, yes again, is different based off the person. Trust me, I know. We are getting into a subjectivity lasagna here. Layers on layers of personal opinions. There is no way to please everyone here, or in life in general. But again, we aren't concerned with things being changed in and of itself, but what is changed. From the trailer, one thing we can glean is that this remake is going for a darker tone, so those looking for the cheesy, self-aware B-movie style of the original, well, you're shit out of luck. But personally, I can live with it. Might be interesting to play a Resident Evil 4 that visually and tonally is more in line with the original concepts for that game. But if I'm going to buy into this remake of Resident Evil 4, it needs to keep one thing intact. And you damn well know what it is. I don't even have to say it at this point. But I'm going to, because I have to talk about it for this video to move forward, and hence I'm going to say the word a million times anyways. So I might as well use the word to introduce what I'm doing. Fundamentals. Specifically the combat. Resident Evil 4 has such a unique combat loop for a third-person game. Hell, because of this, it revolutionized the third-person horror genre. But there really hasn't been a game that plays like it since, not even within its own franchise. It's a game that on the surface doesn't seem special in its gameplay, especially by today's standards, but you'd be wrong. This game holds up for a reason. And with Resident Evil 4 HD Project, it fixes most of the hiccups that were a product of its time. Summarizing what makes the combat in this game so good takes like a whole video in it of itself, but to give you the short version, or at least as short of a version as I can give you without getting carried away, it's a mix of reactive combat and great enemy design that encourages skilled play and smart decision making in combat. And not just with your ability to get headshots or wisely conserve ammo, no. It encourages you to learn the way different body shots cause different reactions and how those reactions can be manipulated to your advantage. Like the follow-up melee moves. You have a kick that you can perform after headshots that on first glance seems like just a nice little free hit until you realize it can stagger crowds. Another great thing about the game is how all the weapons have some sort of utility that isn't always apparent, but when discovered, furthers your understanding of that weapon and how you can use it most effectively in combat. Pistols are obviously used to get precise shots. Shotguns can be used as a power weapon or as crowd control. The TMP is pure crowd control. The sniper is precision but also power. And your magnums are just pure power, like 100% pure destructive power. And again, that's just all the basic utility of those weapons. There's stuff like the flash grenades, which of course blind enemies, but can also kill all targets in the room. And you can kick the enemies while they're blind, which is something that took me years to figure out. Another two tricks that took me years to figure out were one, that snipers one-shot plagas makes the sniper not only a long-distance precision weapon, but also a instant fuck you to the enemies when they try to come at you with this shit. The second trick I learned with the guns is that simple body shots with the pistol do stagger regular enemies just long enough to give you time to set up another shot. Maybe a headshot so that you can get a kick, or a knee shot so that you can suplex them. Or you can use that time to pull out a different weapon altogether. The variety of enemies and their behaviors in this game does a great job at keeping you on your toes. How they move out of the way when you aim at them for too long, or close the distance when they're far away. You got enemies that throw axe and dynamite, testing your split-second reflexes, or enemies with shields that draw your attention and force you to prioritize them. Later enemies have helmets and masks that prevent you from just simply headshotting them, once again reinforcing the importance of learning how body shots work. Then you have the plagas, this X factor that can seemingly pop out of any enemy at any point and have strange and devastating abilities that make you think on your feet. These are just some of the examples of the elements that make Resident Evil 4's gameplay so great. If that's missing, I seriously don't know if I can get behind this remake. Now, as I said before, it doesn't have to copy everything, nor do I expect them to, but that gameplay loop needs to be intact. So, like for example, I don't expect to be able to suplex guys in this game, especially if you want the gameplay to remain in line with the tone this remake is clearly going for. But I expect to be able to do some sort of follow-up after shooting an enemy in the knee. What the animation ends up being doesn't matter, because the suplex in and of itself is not the point. The mechanics around pulling off that suplex are the point. Like, maybe instead of suplexing, Leon knocks the enemy down afterwards and stomps on his head. Or stabs him in the head with a knife. Just something to reward and incentivize pulling off well-timed knee shots. Same with kicking after headshots. It doesn't have to be a roundhouse kick. Maybe it's just a straight push kick. Maybe it's a head stab before a push kick. As long as you can follow up a headshot with some melee attack, and as long as that melee can be used to stagger enemy crowds, that's what matters. Your interaction with enemies during combat, through the gunplay, through the weapons and level design, the choices those interactions force you into are at the heart of Resident Evil 4's gameplay. And even if it's not as bombastic as the original, that gameplay loop is what the remake should be based off of, not a completely different gameplay loop altogether to match this dark tone. Which is what I fear is going to happen. Now, some of you might be asking at this point why I feel this is the case. I mean, this is just a teaser trailer and shows nothing of gameplay. Not really. Well, I am so glad to assume you are asking. First is the darker tone of the trailer itself. Now, that alone isn't a strong enough argument for how I feel. Visual tone and atmosphere don't always dictate gameplay, but Resident Evil 4 was a game whose gameplay and tone matched. And if they intend for gameplay to match the tone of this trailer, then toning things down is almost a necessity. I say almost because, as I explained, I think with different animations, you can, in theory, pull off the same style of gameplay without the wackier elements of it. The question is whether or not Capcom thinks that, or thinks they have to massively overhaul many mechanics, if not all the mechanics, to fit the tone. Again, this teaser trailer isn't enough to definitively make that argument, or even make a strong argument for what I'm saying. However, I do think it's something that does have to be factored in. The main reason I feel this way, however, more stems from the series' history, and the extremely weird spot the original Resident Evil 4 finds itself in, as part of the franchise. See, Resident Evil 4 is sort of an enigma. It's considered a masterpiece by many, and one of the best games in the franchise, even though it's simultaneously barely like the original games, and seen as responsible for the gameplay mechanics that almost ruined the series' reputation. In fact, at one point it did. Now, I say that's more the fault of Resident Evil 5 and 6 screwing things up and not fully getting why Resident Evil 4 was so good. Truth of the matter is that after the 6th game, the series was considered a joke because it strayed so far away from the original games and was no longer horror. That was due to Resident Evil 5 and 6 trying to outdo Resident Evil 4, which took the series in a more action-oriented direction. That just can't be denied. Love or hate Resident Evil 4, that is just the simple truth. And since then, the series has mostly moved away from that. Resident Evil 7 returned the series to form with a first-person perspective. Resident Evil 2 Remake showed that the gameplay loop from the original games can still be successful. The reason we got Resident Evil 4 the way it is because Capcom thought the style of the original games couldn't sustain itself any longer. You see the timeline here? Capcom makes Resident Evil 4 to depart the series from the gameplay of the originals, was successful, but spawned 2 sequels that, despite selling well, are considered to be responsible for the series' lost reputation. Then they go back to the gameplay that is reminiscent of those original games, and they are massively successful with it. Tell me, what does that tell Capcom about the legacy of Resident Evil 4? I mean, sure, there are many ways you can interpret that timeline of events. One of which is that Resident Evil 4 is a fluke. It's a game that's great despite what it changed, and how it gave birth to 2 bad sequels. And that the original formula is what the series needs to be going forward. Now, I don't agree with that. When you look at Resident Evil 4's gameplay, it's not a fluke, it's controlled chaos. But I also can't blame Capcom for coming to that conclusion. Now, something that may hopefully counter this is the legacy of Resident Evil 4. How it shaped the genre for years to come. How Capcom's been able to re-release on just about everything it sells. But will that be enough to entice them to keep the gameplay intact? I don't know. What I do know is that they really haven't made any effort since Resident Evil 6 to return to that style of gameplay. Well, except for Resident Evil 8, which brings its own set of concerns. Even though, not only did Resident Evil 8 bring back Resident Evil 4 mechanics and was in general considered a good game, the aspects that it reintroduced were surface level. Oh, we got a merchant and there's treasure hunting. Hey, Resident Evil 4 fans, remember these mechanics? Isn't it cool that we're bringing this stuff back? Well, yes, but there is one problem. Those mechanics are supporting mechanics that worked because they complemented the gameplay of Resident Evil 4. A combat system Resident Evil 8 just does not have. Now, to be a bit fair, Resident Evil 8 wasn't trying to strictly be Resident Evil 4. If anything, that game was trying to be all Resident Evil games at once. But I can ultimately forgive it in Resident Evil 8. Not with Resident Evil 4 Remake, though. Resident Evil 4 Remake needs to be better than that. Because Resident Evil 4 is a game that has so much more depth in its mechanics that you can do more in that game with a pistol than you can do in Resident Evil 8 with its entire arsenal. In fact, the best argument I can make is that you could remove the merchant and the treasure hunting from Resident Evil 4 and it would still be a deeper game than Resident Evil 8. And my fear is that the success of RE8 might have given Capcom a false idea of Resident Evil 4's mechanics and what made it great. Listen, I'm sure whatever the remake ends up being is going to be good, potentially even great, which is why I'm going to try to keep an open mindset about it because I really don't want to hate on this game preemptively. I guess I'm just kind of bummed out because I really have a love for the gameplay mechanics of Resident Evil 4, and I feel like the series never properly expanded upon those ideas. And I was hoping the remake might be an opportunity for them to do that, but from the looks of the trailer, from everything they've said in interviews about how they want to take the game in new directions, the rumors we were getting about that beforehand, it doesn't seem like that's what we're gonna get, and it kind of bums me out. Not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I'm not a bit upset about that, but I'm not so upset that I'm willing to just completely write this off. Which is why from here on out, nothing but positivity from me. I'm going to try to look on the bright side of this remake. In fact, the next video I have planned on this game is going to be an antithesis to this video, where I try to talk about the benefits of it taking a whole new direction. Beyond that, I have a whole lineup of Resident Evil 4 content from here until the release of the remake that I plan to get out. One video every month. That's the plan. Anyways, that's really all I have to say for now. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. You know, all the good things that help a channel like this grow. Are you or are you not excited for Resident Evil 4 Remake? And why? I'm interested in knowing. Anyways, I'm gonna go play in traffic now because that's what a sane person does. I'll see you all later. Bye. Anyone who has even played a bit of Sifu should know that throwing enemies into walls is a decent way of doing structured damage. So imagine if you could stack that effect and drive yourself insane looking for the collectibles and the thousands of souls scattered across the map. 240,300 to be exact. God